What do you do if you're a Republican and you have some way of messing with the largest unionized employer in the United States? I mean, a way to seriously damage them. You take it, right? So back in 2006, there was a piece of relatively innocuous legislation that came out of the U.S. House of Representatives to reform the Postal Service, to bring them up to speed. Actually, the Postal Service at that point in time was making a profit. And they were talking about using electric cars. They had the largest single-owner fleet of vehicles in the United States. And they were talking about electrifying at least half of them. It would have been a huge jumpstart for the electric car industry. It would have been a huge slap in the face to the fossil fuel industry and the Koch brothers and all their buddies there. And it was the largest unionized employer in the country, the Postal Union. Second largest employer in the country behind Walmart, which, of course, is not unionized. So this piece of legislation came out of the House to help the post office, move along and come into the 21st century. And it went over to the Senate, and something interesting happened. For some reason, somebody in the Senate decided, let's require the post office to pay over a 10-year period in advance all of the health care retirement costs for all of their workers 75 years from now. People who have not even been born yet, let's require them right now to prepay those health care costs. Of course, this is a mind-boggling amount of money. It turned out to be $10 billion a year over a 10-year period. And it has wiped out the post office. This was in 2006. Here's Congressman Peter DeFazio describing how it happened.
Well, it was really a dark of the night thing. There was a pretty non-controversial bill in the House for some postal reform, which was to extend new authority to them to partner with UPS and FedEx. So we were extending that authority. At that point, they didn't have the authority to do that. And then the bill went over to the Senate, and someone at some point snuck in a section in the Senate that no one quite understood at the time, but it talked about retirees' health insurance and prepayment. Mm-hmm. And the bill came back to the House, lame duck session of Congress, virtually Christmas Eve. I think it was actually 2 days before Christmas. Voice vote. No one noticed this change the Senate had snuck in. And that's how it happened.
And that's how it happened. And so Senator Bernie Sanders introduced legislation last year to fix that. It got 62 votes in the Senate, went nowhere. That included 14 Republicans. Went nowhere in the House, of course, which is Republican-controlled. He has a new one that has 28 co-sponsors. But so far it hasn't gone very far. And, of course, nothing in the House of Representatives. And meanwhile, Senator Carper has introduced a bill, along with Tom Coburn, Democrat and Republican, only 2 co-sponsors, not 28 like Bernie's, that would cut Saturday delivery and do a lot of other nasty things at the post office and doesn't do away with this middle-of-the-night thing. Dan Soifer is the Executive Vice President of the Lexington Institute, lexingtoninstitute.org, and apparently a big fan of the Carper-Coburn bill to kneecap the post office. Do I have that right, Don?
Good to talk with you, Tom. It's certainly a bill that recognizes some of the political realities that would need to happen for something to get passed and become law.
In other words, let's kowtow to the Republicans.
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily that I'm a big fan of the legislation. What I am, though, is a fan of Congress figuring out a way to get something done to address a problem that's only...
But when I hear people use that kind of language, acknowledge political realities, get something done, typically what it means is kiss the asses of the Republicans. Frankly, pardon my French, but I think I can say that on the air, and that certainly seems like, that, and I don't see why we should do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that your introduction to the issue was spot on. I think that accurately got important, hit all of the important nuances of this. I think with the one exception that fundamentally we have an institution that lost $16 billion last year, that is in danger of getting into sort of Detroit auto bailout size losses.
All because of this poison pill that was inserted by a Republican in the Senate in 2006.
Well, all because of the legislation that was passed in 2006. This one poison pill that you described, and I do think you described it well, it requires the Postal Service to pre-fund $5 billion a year.
$5 billion a year, yes. $50 billion total over a 10-year period.
But the Postal Service lost $16 billion last year, so it was an important part of the equation.
But wait a minute. They lost $5 billion in 2006, $5 billion in 2007, $5 billion in 2008, $5 billion. Pretty soon it starts to add up. Pretty soon it cripples your ability to do things. Pretty soon it cripples your ability to market and advertise and compete. Pretty soon you start scaling back on things, which they've been doing. And guess what? It puts a company into a death spiral. Any company.
I do agree that pre-funding mandate is problematic.
It's more than problematic. It was a poison pill. This was an attempt by the Republicans to, and by the way, Carper and Coburn's bill has a provision in it that basically starts taking apart the union. I mean, this is all about destroying the largest unionized employer and one of the largest unions in the United States. Pure and simple.
It is, and it does. And the approach that the Senate legislation took, in contrast to a bill that passed the House, where the Senate bill would, for instance, Congress has forever put really strict rules on the management of the Postal Service about what it can and can't do to make or lose money.
Right.
And none of these bills fundamentally change that. And in fact, each of the bills in different ways puts more restrictions on the leadership of the Postal Service, who's responsible for balancing their budget. Because your listeners should remember that the Postal Service is self-sustaining. It doesn't rely on taxpayer dollars. It generates the revenue that it needs for its operating funds.
All right, and this is something that's unique to the last 30 years or so.
Yes. And I don't know if it's sustainable moving forward or not, because the model that we've always used before, which is that monopoly consumers like you and me, when we wait online and buy a stamp and mail a letter, half of the money that stamp costs, half of that 40 cents or as the price of a stamp has gone up, has gone towards subsidizing other functions of the Postal Service that are not making money. And that always used to be adequate. As you said before, the Postal Service was always generating a small profit.
Oh, and I think they would be.
We need to find new ways to fund the business model.
I think they would be now if they were allowed to do other things. I mean, there's so many different things. Post offices in other countries, they have banking capabilities. They can provide email capability. They could give Gmail a run for its money. I mean, there's all kinds of things that the post office could be doing, but they're not allowed to by law. They're blocked from all of these things. Rural post offices could become basically community centers. There's just which in the old small town, where the post office was a part-time thing, and in some small towns it still is, actually works. But please forgive my earlier, kiss their butt language. That was inappropriate. I was. I'm upset about this.
Your introduction was right.
My apology, Don.
Well, no one really knew what the implications of that were going to be, and now it's a whole different landscape for the viability of the Postal Service.
Yeah, and my apology to anybody who may have been offended by it. But why promote Carper's bill, which only has one co-sponsor, Tom Coburn, who's a pretty toxic guy in my opinion, instead of Bernie Sanders' bill, which has 28 co-sponsors? It's sitting there right now. And it fixes the post office and doesn't do away with the union. Is that why? Because the political realities are that the Republicans won't do anything that keeps the union in place?
I don't think any of the bills being talked about now are adequate to really solve the problem. I think we have to go back not just to the legislation, the 2006 legislation, but ultimately go back to 1971 and the legislation that Richard Nixon signed and how this is organized. And the questions you asked before about other things and other activities that the Postal Service should be allowed to do that it's doing in Italy and around the world. In Brazil, they can't build post offices fast enough. I think that has to be part of the equation.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. Maybe we should reconsider Ben Franklin. Started the first post office. His notion that this is something that is a legitimate function of government. It is, after all. Hang on just a second.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It is, after all, in Article 1 of the Constitution, Section 8. Dan Soifer, LexingtonInstitute.org. Thank you, Dan.